I never imagined that a simple evening in someone else's kitchen could unravel the quiet equilibrium of my life. But there I was, standing in Claire's small, warmly lit apartment, the smell of garlic and simmering tomato sauce curling around us like a gentle warning. Claire, my best friend for over a decade, moved with a casual grace that made every action seem effortless, the way she chopped vegetables, humming softly under her breath, or reached across the counter for the olive oil, brushing her hand against mine in a fleeting, accidental touch. It should have been innocent. It should have been normal. And yet, the electricity in that brief contact made my chest tighten in ways I couldn't explain. Claire had always been the kind of person who commanded attention without trying. Her laughter, soft and melodic, had a way of drawing you in, and her eyes, warm hazel flecked with gold, seemed to see past the walls you built around yourself. I, on the other hand, had always been cautious, careful, aware of boundaries. But in her presence, caution felt like a fragile shield, one that the night was already beginning to chip away. It started innocently enough. We were making dinner together, talking about work, mutual friends, and the mundane rhythm of our week. But subtle tensions had begun to simmer beneath the surface, unspoken, almost imperceptible. Every glance lingered too long, every touch felt heavier than it should. I caught myself replaying moments in my mind, the way her shoulder brushed mine, the tilt of her head when she laughed, the warmth radiating from her as she leaned over the counter. I tried to dismiss it, to focus on the chopping, stirring, and laughter, but a knot of curiosity and unease tightened inside me. Then came the first crack in the familiar pattern. A spill, a clumsy laugh, an accidental touch, small, insignificant in isolation, but together they created a tension that demanded acknowledgement. We both froze, our eyes meeting in the brief silence, a mixture of amusement and something far more charged reflected in each other's gaze. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, and I nodded, though my thoughts were already spiraling, caught between curiosity, guilt, and something I wasn't ready to name. It was in that frozen moment that the central conflict made itself known. Our friendship, so steady, so dependable, was suddenly a fragile thing, teetering on the edge between comfort and desire. I didn't know how to navigate the pull I felt toward her, nor could I predict the way the night would unfold. And yet, there was no turning back. Something had been set in motion in that kitchen, an invisible tension that promised revelations, confrontations, and choices I wasn't prepared to make. The air between us was thick, charged with the unspoken. And as I glanced at her, her hair tied loosely at the nape of her neck, her eyes glinting with warmth and something I couldn't define, I realized that the night ahead would be unlike anything either of us had expected. What started as a simple dinner was about to become a journey into truths neither of us were fully ready to face. Claire had always been magnetic, the kind of person who seemed to fill a room without trying. I knew her for years, best friend, confidant, occasional partner in crime for late-night escapades, but I had never felt anything quite like the tension in her kitchen that night. As I leaned against the counter, waiting for her to finish stirring the sauce, I studied her, the way her brow furrowed in concentration, the subtle curve of her lips when she hummed along to a song playing softly on the radio. Everything about her was familiar, yet everything felt suddenly charged, as if I were seeing her for the first time. I told myself I was imagining it, that my mind was reading too much into her gestures. But the air between us seemed to vibrate with unspoken words. Her hand brushed mine again when she reached for a spice jar, and this time, neither of us pulled away. Instead, a quiet, almost imperceptible acknowledgement passed between us, a mutual recognition that the night had shifted, that the ordinary rhythm of friendship was being rewritten in subtle, insistent ways. It wasn't just Claire. I could feel it in myself too. My thoughts were a tangled mess of guilt, curiosity, and longing. I tried to focus on the chopping, the aroma of garlic and onions mingling with the tang of tomato sauce, the clatter of utensils against the counter, but even as I busied myself, my mind kept returning to her. Every laugh, every tilt of her head, every glance that lingered longer than necessary felt magnified, intimate, impossible to ignore. We had shared countless evenings together, yet none of them carried the weight of this one. The stakes felt higher, though I couldn't name why. Was it because her boyfriend, Tom, was out of town? Or was it because the invisible line between friendship and something more had always been thinner than I realized? The answer eluded me, but the tension made every moment sharper, every laugh slightly nervous, every word carefully measured. Then came a small, accidental disaster. A plate of pasta slipped from my grasp, tumbling to the floor with a clatter. Claire's startled gasp was followed by a laugh, soft and breathy, and I felt my chest tighten. I knelt to help, and our hands collided as we reached for the same utensil. Our eyes met, wide and startled, and for a moment, time itself seemed suspended. The room, the sounds, the smells all faded into the background, leaving only the electric pull between us. It was in that fleeting, suspended moment that the central conflict crystallized. The boundary between friendship and desire was no longer theoretical. It was tangible, present, and undeniable. And though neither of us spoke the words, both of us knew the rules had changed. Something had been awakened in the kitchen that evening, something neither of us could easily ignore or forget. As the sauce simmered gently on the stove and the late afternoon sunlight spilled across the counter, I realized the night was only beginning. Whatever happened next would force us to confront truths we had both avoided for years, and it was impossible to tell whether we were ready for the consequences. The kitchen felt smaller somehow, the air thicker, as if every glance, every word carried more weight than it should. Claire leaned against the counter, absently twirling a strand of hair around her finger, and I caught myself noticing the way the sunlight hit her cheekbones, the gentle curve of her smile. I tried to focus on the chopping again, on the rhythm of cooking, but it was impossible. My mind kept circling back to her, her presence, her nearness, the subtle electricity in the space between us. "You're awfully quiet tonight," she said softly, eyes flicking toward me. Her tone wasn't accusatory, it was curious, expectant, and for a moment, I froze, unsure how to respond. I swallowed, forcing a laugh that felt hollow even to me. "Just thinking," I murmured, hoping it sounded casual, though it wasn't. I could feel her gaze resting on me longer than necessary, as if she were trying to read what I wasn't saying. We continued cooking, but the conversation faltered into pauses filled with unspoken tension. Every accidental touch, the brief brush of hands reaching for the same pan, the shared laughter over a sauce spill felt magnified, electric. I could sense her awareness of it too. Her shoulders tensed slightly, then relaxed, her breaths shallow and deliberate. I wondered if she noticed my racing heartbeat, my own self-conscious awareness of the line we were approaching. Then she leaned closer under the guise of tasting the sauce, and our hands brushed again. This time, neither of us pulled away. The world outside the kitchen, the mundane chatter of distant neighbors, the faint hum of traffic faded entirely. For a few suspended moments, there was nothing but us, the smell of garlic, the warmth radiating from her, the tension crackling like static electricity. I caught a flicker of something in her eyes, uncertainty, longing, maybe regret, and my chest tightened. "Do you ever think about things differently?" she asked, voice quieter now, almost a whisper. I hesitated, unsure how to interpret her question, but the weight of it was unmistakable. Was she asking about the future? About us? Or about something even more dangerous, the unspoken desires we had both been ignoring for so long? Before I could answer, her phone buzzed on the counter. I glanced at the screen. It was a message from Tom. Claire's expression shifted subtly, tightening, but not entirely defensive. I realized the stakes had shifted again. The presence of someone else, even just a message, reminded me of the precarious line we were walking. Desire, guilt, and loyalty tangled into one complex knot I wasn't sure either of us could navigate safely. We exchanged another glance, heavy with meaning, and in that moment, it was clear, whatever had been simmering between us in the kitchen was no longer accidental. The night was moving toward a tipping point, and neither of us could predict the outcome. Something had been awakened, a desire, a confession, a vulnerability, and once stirred, it could not be undone. The smell of the sauce, the fading sunlight, the lingering brush of her hand, all of it pressed against me, insisting I notice, feel, and confront the truth. And I knew that before the night ended, we would have to face it. The evening had shifted into a quiet, almost fragile stillness. The kitchen, once alive with the rhythm of chopping, stirring, and laughter, felt charged with anticipation. Claire leaned against the counter, her eyes tracing the steam rising from the sauce, yet I could sense she was aware of me more than the food. My pulse thumped in my ears, each beat reminding me of the invisible line we were nearing, a line neither of us had dared cross until now. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, yet cutting through the tension like a knife. I froze mid-step, holding a ladle in my hand, uncertain how to brace myself for whatever was coming. There was no prelude, no hesitation, just a truth she could no longer hold inside. "I've been feeling things," she continued, her eyes flicking to mine, searching, vulnerable. "Things I didn't expect, things I thought I could ignore, but I can't anymore." Her words faltered, but the meaning hung heavy between us. I felt my stomach knot as realization began to dawn. This wasn't casual. This wasn't fleeting. The tension I had been sensing for hours, the lingering touches, the stolen glances, it all pointed to one undeniable truth. "You mean, about us?" I asked cautiously, my voice catching, betraying the mix of fear and longing that churned within me. She nodded, a faint tremor in her lips, and for a moment, the kitchen was silent save for the faint hiss of the simmering sauce. "I never planned for this to happen," she confessed, her gaze dropping to the counter. "I didn't mean to feel this way, especially with Tom, but I can't deny it anymore. You've always been here for me, closer than anyone else, and somehow, I can't stop thinking about you. About what we might have, if we let ourselves." Her words struck me like a thunderclap. I couldn't speak at first. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, as if the room itself had absorbed the weight of the confession. My thoughts spun wildly, guilt, excitement, fear, desire, all tangled together. I realized that I had felt it too, that the subtle attraction, the unspoken longing, had never been one-sided. And now, laid bare in the quiet of her kitchen, it was impossible to ignore. I stepped closer, hesitant, unsure of the boundaries we had crossed and the consequences of stepping further. Her eyes met mine, wide, searching, and in them I saw a mirror of my own conflicted emotions. There was longing, yes, but also fear of betrayal, of crossing a line, of breaking the fragile equilibrium of our friendship. The revelation lingered between us like the scent of garlic and herbs, pervasive and impossible to ignore. Whatever unspoken rules we had followed until this moment no longer mattered. The night had shifted irrevocably, the dynamic between us had been transformed, and both of us knew it. We were standing on the edge of something dangerous and exhilarating, and there was no turning back. And in that suspended, fragile moment, the truth settled in: our friendship was no longer enough. Something deeper, more complicated, had emerged, demanding attention, honesty, and courage. The night ahead would test us in ways neither of us could anticipate, but the seed had been planted, and there was no erasing it now. The kitchen felt quieter now, though the tension hadn't entirely dissipated. The faint aroma of garlic and simmering sauce lingered, mingling with a sense of vulnerability neither of us could shake. We sat opposite each other at the small table, words sparse, our hands occasionally brushing as if testing the fragile boundaries that had shifted irreversibly. The confession hung between us, delicate and perilous, like fine crystal teetering on the edge of a table. "I don't know what comes next," I admitted, voice low, almost a whisper. My eyes traced the curve of her hand resting near mine, hesitant, unsure. She looked back at me, her gaze steady yet tinged with a mixture of fear and anticipation. "Neither do I," she murmured. And in that honesty, there was a strange relief, a mutual acknowledgement that we could no longer pretend, that the night had changed something fundamental between us. We spoke cautiously, carefully, about what had been stirred up in the quiet hours of cooking and conversation. Our laughter returned intermittently, softer this time, tinged with awkwardness and warmth. We revisited memories of our long friendship, noting the subtle signs we'd both ignored for years, the accidental touches, lingering glances, the comfort that had always existed just beneath the surface. Each memory now carried a new significance, a reminder that feelings had been quietly simmering, waiting for acknowledgement. And yet, amid the tension and the unspoken desires, there was clarity. We recognized the fragility of the situation, Claire's relationship with Tom, the potential consequences of crossing lines that could never be uncrossed, and the undeniable risk of losing the trust we had built over a decade. But acknowledging the risk didn't erase the truth. Our connection had deepened, evolved, and could no longer be confined to ordinary friendship. As the night wore on, the city outside grew quiet, the hum of distant traffic fading into a gentle stillness. I realized that sometimes, life doesn't provide clear answers, only choices and consequences. We could step back, retreat into safety and familiarity, or we could confront the complexities of desire, honesty, and longing. Neither option felt simple, and neither offered certainty. But the evening had forced us to acknowledge a truth we could no longer ignore. When I left her apartment, the cool night air brushed my face, grounding me in reality. I walked home slowly, replaying the confessions, the fleeting touches, the laughter, and the shared vulnerability. The night had shifted everything, yet nothing had been resolved fully. Our story, like the lingering aroma of dinner, remained suspended in time, potent and unforgettable. And as I turned the corner toward my street, I realized that some moments, awkward, tense, and emotionally charged, don't simply end. They echo, shaping the way we understand ourselves and others. That night in the kitchen was one of them. I didn't know where our friendship, or what might come after, would lead, but I knew one thing: some truths, once revealed, cannot be forgotten. And perhaps, in the quiet reflection that follows, we find the courage to navigate the uncertainty and the hope to embrace the complexity of human connection. The days after that night felt like walking through fog. I returned to my routine, but everything had shifted. Claire's confession lingered in my mind like an echo I couldn't silence. Even in ordinary moments, pouring coffee, walking down the street, answering work emails, I found her presence intruding on my thoughts, subtle gestures replaying like a private film in my head. The kitchen, the spilled pasta, the brush of our hands, it all carried more meaning than I had ever allowed myself to admit. When we met again, it was under the pretense of normalcy, but the tension was palpable. Claire greeted me with her familiar smile, but her eyes betrayed something else: uncertainty, longing, and a quiet hesitation I hadn't seen before. "Are we okay?" she asked, almost cautiously, as if testing the waters of our newly exposed reality. I nodded, though my throat felt tight. "I think we are," I said, but the words rang hollow even to me. Our conversations became layered, cautious. Every word, every laugh, every touch was measured, but the undercurrent of what had happened, what we had both felt, couldn't be ignored. I noticed how she lingered slightly longer when we exchanged glances, how her hand brushed mine a fraction too often, and how even the simplest conversation was heavy with unsaid emotions. I, too, found myself walking a line I hadn't anticipated, wanting to retreat to safety, yet drawn inexorably toward her, toward the thrill and the danger of unspoken desire. Then came a moment that brought everything into sharp relief. We were sitting on her couch, talking about trivial matters, when she paused mid-sentence and looked at me with a vulnerability that caught me off guard. "I don't know if I can keep pretending it's nothing," she admitted, voice trembling slightly. I swallowed, realizing that the kitchen had been a prelude, and now the walls of her apartment had become a mirror, reflecting the complexity of our feelings back at us. I wanted to speak, to reassure her, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, we sat in silence, the room filled with the weight of what we had confessed and the uncertainty of what would come next. I felt a mix of guilt, exhilaration, and fear, the moral conflict of desire versus loyalty pressing down on me from all directions. And yet, in that silence, there was also a strange clarity. The truth had already been revealed. The question was no longer whether we felt something, it was what we would do about it. By the time I left, the sky had darkened, and the streetlights cast long shadows that mirrored my conflicted thoughts. I knew that the night, the confession, the tension, it was all a turning point. We had crossed a threshold, and the aftermath would test the boundaries of friendship, trust, and morality. The choices ahead were uncertain, fraught with risk, but one thing was undeniable: our lives had been altered, turned into and there was no returning to the simplicity between Claire and me began to weigh heavier than anything I had anticipated. Every encounter carried the same fragile tension: the accidental brush of hands, the fleeting glance, the quiet silences that spoke volumes. It was no longer just about desire, it was about navigating a minefield of guilt, loyalty, and fear. I could sense it in her too. Her eyes betrayed a struggle between longing and restraint, and I felt my own moral compass wobble under the gravity of our connection. One evening, I found myself back in her apartment under the pretense of watching a movie, though neither of us truly focused on the screen. The lights were dim, the city humming softly outside the window, and the quiet between us felt charged, almost electric. I noticed her hands resting near mine, unconsciously inching closer, and the subtle way her shoulder brushed against mine as she reached for popcorn. Every small gesture felt magnified, loaded with meaning we both feared to confront. "I can't keep doing this," she said suddenly, her voice breaking the fragile calm. I froze, the words slicing through the tension like a sudden cold wind. She turned to face me fully, her expression a mixture of fear, desire, and honesty. "I'm scared of what we're doing, of what we might feel, and yet, I can't stop thinking about you." Her confession hit me with a clarity I couldn't ignore. The conflict that had been simmering beneath the surface, the pull between friendship, morality, and raw desire, was now impossible to evade. I opened my mouth to speak, to offer reassurances or excuses, but no words came. The room felt impossibly small, every heartbeat amplified, every breath shared. We were standing at the edge of something irreversible, and both of us knew it. She paused, eyes searching mine, and I finally understood the depth of her struggle. "I shouldn't want this," she whispered, almost pleading, "but I do. And I don't know if that makes me a terrible person or just human." I felt the same conflicting emotions twisting inside me, longing tangled with guilt, affection clouded by fear, desire intertwined with hesitation. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The silence was heavy but intimate, a space where truth and vulnerability hung exposed. I realized that the central conflict had evolved. It was no longer simply about unspoken attraction. It was about confronting the consequences of acknowledging it, about understanding the moral and emotional weight of our desires, and deciding whether the risk was worth taking. Finally, she leaned back slightly, releasing a shaky breath, and I mirrored her. The tension hadn't vanished, but it had shifted, becoming something more tangible, something we both understood needed careful navigation. We were at a crossroads, and the night would demand choices neither of us was fully prepared to make. As the city lights flickered outside, I knew this was only the beginning. The coming hours, the decisions we faced, would test everything we thought we knew about each other and ourselves. The following evening, the weight of unspoken truths pressed down on me like a physical presence. I arrived at Claire's apartment, and from the moment she opened the door, I could feel the air charged with anticipation and uncertainty. Her eyes met mine, wide and searching, as if trying to measure the depth of my thoughts before I even stepped inside. The tension between us had evolved into something undeniable, a fragile balance between fear, longing, and curiosity. We settled on the couch, the dim glow of the city outside casting shadows across her face. Neither of us spoke at first, the silence heavy but intimate. Then she reached for my hand, tentatively, as though testing the limits of what was allowed. My own heart hammered in response, and I realized how much I had been denying myself, denying both the attraction and the consequences of acknowledging it. "I can't stop thinking about last week," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "The kitchen, the way it's all been on my mind non-stop." I nodded, feeling the same conflicted emotions welling inside me. Desire intertwined with guilt, longing tangled with hesitation, and I couldn't tell whether I was drawn to the moment or terrified of it. Her hand lingered in mine, warmth seeping through, and suddenly the distance we had maintained all these days collapsed. I saw her struggle, the internal battle between wanting to step forward and fearing the consequences. "I don't know if we should do this," she admitted, "but I also don't know if we can pretend it isn't happening anymore." The honesty in her words struck me, and I felt a mixture of relief and dread. For the first time, we truly confronted the central conflict, the collision of desire, loyalty, and friendship. The moral tension, the years of unspoken attraction, and the fragility of our bond all hung in the balance. One step could change everything, one word could make the moment irreversible. I looked at her, noting the slight tremor in her lips, the way her eyes glimmered with both hope and fear. I realized that whatever happened next would define us, either shattering the connection we had cherished or transforming it into something far more profound. We sat in silence again, letting the weight of the night settle, acknowledging without words the depth of our emotions. Every brush of hands, every glance, every shared breath seemed magnified. I understood then that the night was not about a single decision or act, it was about facing the truth, the vulnerability, and the consequences that came with it. Finally, she exhaled, leaning back slightly, her hand still resting near mine. Whatever happens, she said softly, we need to be honest with ourselves and with each other. The words were simple, but they carried the gravity of everything that had passed. I nodded, feeling the clarity amidst the chaos. Our choices from here would shape not only our friendship but also the parts of ourselves we had been hiding. As the city lights flickered outside, I realized that the emotional climax had arrived not in a single act, but in the courage to confront the truth, to sit in the tension, and to face the complexity of desire, loyalty, and human connection. The night would not end neatly, but it had reached a pivotal moment that would forever alter our lives. The following morning, the apartment felt different, still familiar, yet charged with the remnants of the night before. Claire was quiet, making coffee with her usual grace, but the subtle tension between us lingered like a shadow. Neither of us spoke immediately. Words seemed inadequate to capture what had shifted, the delicate balance between honesty, longing, and the unspoken rules we had broken. I watched her for a moment, noticing how even in small gestures, the tilt of her head, the way her fingers wrapped around the mug, the previous night's revelations hovered between us. There was an intimacy now, unspoken but undeniable, and yet it was tempered by caution, guilt, and the knowledge that every choice had consequences. The central conflict was no longer theoretical, it existed in the quiet, in the stolen glances, in the electricity that lingered every time our hands brushed. I've been thinking, she said finally, breaking the silence. Her voice was calm, but her eyes betrayed vulnerability. About us. About last night. I don't want to hurt anyone, least of all myself, or you. But I also can't pretend it didn't happen, or that I don't feel what I feel. I nodded, understanding fully, feeling the same tangled emotions, desire, hesitation, guilt, and an aching curiosity about what could be. We talked cautiously, navigating the fragile terrain of truth and consequence. Every word was measured, every confession layered with care. We revisited moments that had once seemed ordinary, the kitchen, the spilled pasta, the shared laughter, but now, each memory carried new weight, a reminder of the tension and vulnerability that had emerged. I realized that our friendship had transformed. It was no longer simply familiar or comfortable. It was complicated, intense, and profoundly human. The moral tension remained, but so did a quiet understanding. We could acknowledge what had surfaced without allowing it to destroy everything we valued. Desire could coexist with loyalty if tempered by honesty, if approached with care. And perhaps, in that delicate balance, there was a chance to preserve the bond that had sustained us for years while embracing the truth that had finally come to light. When I left her apartment, the morning air felt crisp and grounding, a contrast to the turbulence inside. I walked slowly, replaying every glance, every touch, every confession. The night and morning had shifted something fundamental, not in a way that demanded immediate action, but in a way that demanded awareness, courage, and reflection. Our choices would ripple through our lives, but for the first time, the path ahead felt illuminated by honesty rather than fear. As I turned the corner, I realized that some truths, once revealed, cannot be forgotten. They linger, shape, and challenge us, forcing us to confront ourselves and our desires. That night in the kitchen, and the days that followed, had changed us both. And while the resolution was not neatly tied, it was profound. The courage to face vulnerability, the willingness to acknowledge human complexity, and the fragile hope that connection, even complicated, could endure.